My grandpa loves touching me when we sleep together. Today, I found out the horrifying reason why. My grandfather forces me to sleep with him and loves touching me every night. When finally I asked him about it, he told me the terrifying reason behind our intimate bed shenanigans. My grandfather worked as a homicide detective, and over the years he's told me some crazy stories, but he says this unsolved mystery is the reason behind everything. And after hearing it, I don't think I can sleep again. This is what he said. The case was a murder. At least that's what it looked like. And it was me and Olson, my co-worker. There was a family, the Niebels. There was Benjamin, the husband, Jennifer, the wife, and Katie, their 6-year-old daughter. One of their neighbors had gone out for the paper around 6 a.m. and saw the Nebels' front door wide open. When she went over to see if everything was okay, she saw the wife's body. The neighbor called 911, and eventually we were sent over there. Now, when I say there were no outward signs of a struggle, I mean it. There was no sign whatsoever that anything had happened, well, except for the dead body. But even her body, there were no wounds, no marks of any kind. On our way to the house, it came over the radio that the husband and daughter were unaccounted for. If you're thinking, the husband did it, we did too. Obviously, problem was, both the family's cars were still in the garage, so we think they might be on foot. Some officers canvassed the neighborhood, and no one had seen them, including 2 neighbors that were on their porches for hours, starting in the early morning. No one had heard any kind of commotion coming from their house either. We searched the house. We went through it, paying attention to every single detail, basement to attic, found nothing, so we left. We'd spent hours in that house, thinking maybe we should come back in a day or two with some fresh eyes. We then went over to where Benjamin worked. He was a supervisor at a lumberyard. According to his co-workers, he'd shown up at work that morning just before 5 a.m. When he got in, he worked on this narrow crate thing he was building in his office, something he'd told his co-workers was a project for his house. According to the other morning supervisor, he'd only built about half of the thing. Around 6:15, he said he was running to the bathroom, and that was the last anyone saw him. They never saw him leave. While we were at the lumberyard, I realized I left my notes at the house. We drove back over there, and we got there while they were taking the wife's body away. As soon as we walked in, the stench hit us like a bus. It was what a newly discovered but long dead body smells like. We asked a few of the officers and forensics folks that were still at the house what the smell was, and they told us that it had only started a few minutes before we'd gotten back there. I'm not exaggerating when I say the smell was everywhere in the house. I've smelled some dead ones before, but this smelled like a goddamn anime cosplay convention. Pretty quickly, we found that the smell was strongest, leading up to the attic. Now, I told you before, we checked the attic. I checked it myself probably 5 times, but we went back up. I was up the little pull-down ladder first, and when I poked my head up, I saw a crate. This was not there last time we checked. It was shaped kind of like a rifle case. It was standing straight up, and there was blood leaking from it. We called the photographers and all the people in there. They all did their thing, and finally they pull out all the nails and opened the box. Out falls the husband. Think about that. This guy was maybe 5'10" and 280 pounds, and he was put in a 3 foot by 2 foot by 6 inch crate. His bones were just a mess. His organs were flattened inside, and his eyes were removed. His skin had the discoloration of a body that had been dead for about 2 weeks, which obviously didn't make sense since they'd seen him at work that morning. We were standing there trying to rationalize the whole situation when something caught everyone's ears at the same time. A little girl's voice calling out for help. What followed was a sequence of all the people in the attic, and the rest of the house, and the people out on the lawn, and the few people that were standing on the other side of the yellow tape, all saying some variation of the phrase, "It sounds like it's coming from over there." Problem was, every single person swore they heard it coming from a different direction. Me, I heard it from right above me. No kidding. The first time I heard that little voice say help me, I looked straight up, right up to the rafters. Of course she wasn't there. It was just my brain's response to where it perceived her voice is coming from. We had to listen to every one of these people tell us where they thought they heard her voice coming from. People swore up and down they heard it coming from the kitchen cabinets, the bedroom closets, the refrigerator, and even behind the toilet. People on the street said they heard it from underneath cars, behind trees, on the sides of the houses next to the Niebels. Everyone heard her voice for about a minute and a half, 2 minutes tops, and then it just stopped. About 2 weeks after that day, the wife's sister had a funeral for Jennifer. It went fine, they buried her, all that. The husband's remains were cremated not long after that, and put on display in a different part of the cemetery. Days after he was placed in the urn, it just disappeared out of nowhere. It was missing for about 6 months, and then one day we got a call, and found out a groundskeeper at the cemetery had called in. The wife had been dug up and posed like she was leaning against the grave, just relaxing. She had the urn in her hands, but it was wrapped in skin. They tested it, and it was the husband's skin. They'd pretty well reconstructed the man after he poured out the crate, and he hadn't been missing any skin. And remember, I told you his skin was discolored. Well, this skin was perfectly preserved, and inside the urn, with his ashes, there were 3 eyeballs. Only one of them was the husband's. It's been 22 years. I still hear that girl's voice calling out sometimes, and I don't mean my memory or mind is playing tricks on me. Ask your grandmother, she's heard her, the same 6-year-old voice. And then, I remember it was May 12th, 2007. I was going to pick up a pizza for us. I saw that girl. I saw Katie Nebel. I don't mean I saw her all grown up. I mean I saw that fucking kid. She was standing outside the Walgreens right by our old house, crying. I pulled over and got out of the car, and I started to walk up to her. I can't explain how I felt at that moment. I was nauseous. I was so afraid, terrified, more than I've ever been. She looked right at me and said in that same voice, "Help me, please." I don't know what the hell happened, but she just disappeared. I never took my eyes off her. She was just there 1 second, go to the next. I thought I was losing my mind. I was seriously worried about my mental health. But then, about an hour after I got back home, the phone rang. It was Olson. Hadn't talked to him in 5 years, and he called me that night. Said he saw Katie Nebel sitting on a bus stop bench, crying. He lived on the other side of the country. I then found out he killed himself the next day. What terrified me the most was the fact that we never found a trace of that girl throughout the case. That girl's voice still wakes me up in the middle of the night. Sometimes I hear it from downstairs, sometimes from the bathroom. Sometimes I'll be laying on my side, facing away from your grandmother, and it'll sound like the voice is coming from her mouth. In those situations, I feel helpless, like the only thing I can do is just grope you and fondle your balls to give me some sort of relief.